Good evening. My name is Bob Liff, and this is the CUNY Forum, a monthly town meeting that brings prominent New Yorkers together with faculty and students of the Edward T. Rogowsky Internship Program in Government and Public Affairs. New York is center stage in the presidential election as Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton face off as our first all-New York City election since Franklin Delano Roosevelt beat Wendell Willkie in 1940 and Thomas Dewey 4 years later. How's that for historical trivia? Trump has dominated the stage with a free association political campaign that may have served him well as a business developer and reality TV star, but has led many Americans to fear a potential commander-in-chief who dabbles in racism, immigrant bashing, and misogyny, and loose talk about nuclear proliferation and ignoring NATO. Clinton was forced at one point in their first debate to take time to assure nervous allies across the world that we really would abide by our international agreements. But while New York is as solidly in Clinton's Democratic column as one could imagine, the fact that polls show a tightening race indicate that we are really not as in touch with the rest of the country as we might like to think we are. The hope for Democrats is that anti-Trump sentiment could tilt races for the United States Senate into Democratic control for the first time since 2010's Republican Tea Party revolt and narrow the Republicans' historically large majority in the House of Representatives. One would assume that would be good news for urban areas in need for a restored commitment by the federal government to its support for housing, transportation, and infrastructure. Though the last decades teach us that conventional wisdom may be conventional, but relying on it may not be very wise. Even-numbered years are also election years for the state legislature, where Democrats hope that same animus towards Trump can tilt the state Senate into Democratic hands. But the growing strength of the independent Democratic caucus, which is allied with Republicans to keep numerically larger Democrats out of power in Albany's upper chamber, could stymie that hope, with Marisol Alcantara, recently nominated to replace Congressman Adriano Espaillat in a Washington Heights-based district, already lining up with the IDC. Of course, Governor Cuomo, still the colossus of state politics despite the recent indictments of close aides and others, may not be too upset about a split legislature. It's an example of how transactional politics so often, pardon the word, trumps party and ideology in the public sphere. Politics may be a partisan blood sport, but there are real implications for cities with great needs like New York. We're joined by four New Yorkers who take part in the political debate and over the future of our city, state, and country. Jaime Estades is the founder and president of the Latino Leadership Institute. Robert George is a member of the Daily News Editorial Board. Bertha Lewis is the founder and president of the Black Institute. Jessica Proud, a partner at the November Group, is a veteran Republican campaign consultant. And they will tell us what it all means. Robert, let me start with you, since you're the editorial board member, so therefore you know everything. Why is this so close an election? Or is it so close an election?
It is a close election. Through a weird set of happenstance, both parties nominated the two most unpopular nominees in the history of presidential politics. And so the electorate is as much as voting against the other person as they are for the nominee of their party. So that's the basic reasons. Hillary Clinton, as accomplished as a candidate as she may be, has just built up a lot of baggage in her 25+ years in politics, and so she's a polarizing figure, and Donald Trump is a polarizing figure for, well, obvious reasons, and so that's what you've got right now. Hillary Clinton is still leading, mainly because the Democrats have sort of built up almost a blue wall over the last couple of presidential cycles. So even if she loses a few states, she's got some leeway. But Trump has managed to appeal to particularly the white working class, and he's keeping it close. And we'll see what happens in the next couple of debates to see whether he can bring some more votes over.
Jessica, the Republican Party doesn't know what the hell to do with Donald Trump. He walked through the middle of a 17-candidate field, insulting Republicans along with women, Muslims, Mexicans, whoever else. He continues to take shots. he ultimately takes shots at and demands support from the Republican establishment. Is this a existential crisis for the party?
Well, I think both parties, what you really saw in the primaries, were going through these transformative issues. You know, you saw it on the Democratic side with the rise of Bernie Sanders, and I think a lot of people feel and view the heart and soul of the Democratic Party being a lot further left than it was. It is no longer the party of JFK. And so, you know, you're seeing this populist movement, and that's certainly what happened with Trump as well.
Or Bill Clinton.
Or Bill Clinton, for that matter, exactly. So you're seeing that on the Republican Party as well. You know, Trump, which is why I think a lot of conservatives rejected him and still continue to withhold their support, because he's not, he didn't necessarily espouse a lot of the traditional Republican principles, certainly on the issues of trade and some foreign policy. So, you know, it remains to be seen, I think, what happens post-election if he wins. Like, obviously, it is the party of Trump now because he's the presidential nominee. But there were so many new people that came into the primary process that were not even registered to vote and certainly weren't active voting Republicans. So whether or not those people stay active within the party, I mean, I would guess that if he loses, he's not going to go away quietly. And all of those people that are supporting him, you know, there is going to be some sort of come to Jesus moment, if you will, I think, after the election, win or lose, to figure out where the party goes from there. But I do think that it's something both parties are experiencing, and it is driven largely by this populist frustration that you're seeing across the country.
Jaime, he began the campaign by insulting Mexicans, and has, although it didn't come up in the debate virtually at all, immigration has been central to, you know, kind of an anti-immigration, kind of a xenophobic appeal has been central to his entire campaign. And the most recent incident was kind of fat-shaming the former Venezuelan Miss Universe. Does he have a prayer of picking up Latino votes across the country?
I wrote once in an article that Trump won't get the Latino vote even if he picks Simón Bolívar as vice president. And he needs at least 45% of the Latino vote, regardless of the white vote, African American vote. He needs 45% of the Latino vote in order for him to get elected in this election. If he gets to 12 in this election, that will be a lot. So in terms of the Latino vote, I think that it is not going to happen. Now, the analysis, if you do an analysis that is nationwide, you see an election that is close. If you do an analysis, which is the right analysis, which is state by state, that's how you get elected in the United States, is by electoral colleges, not by majority of the vote. Then you still find it close, but the Latino vote then has a lot to say in terms of this election, especially in states like Colorado, New Mexico, and especially in Florida, where Hillary, I think, is 1% ahead, and 2 weeks ago it was Trump 1% ahead. That's 29 electoral colleges that are in play. Central Florida is going to be the key in order to decide, and that's where the majority of the Latinos are concentrated now. 43% of registered voters in Florida, Republicans and Democrats, 43% are concentrated in the I-4 corridor from Tampa to Orlando.
And unlike the traditional Cuban-dominated
which was in the
Latino
South,
vote,
that is
now you have this huge Puerto Rican-dominated Central Florida.
and also Mexican and Dominicans, and also a lot of African American from Orlando to Tampa. All that corridor is 43% of registered voters. So that is extremely important. One of the ideas of the Republican Party before this election began was that they wanted to have Rubio for vice president or president,
Marco
and
Rubio,
then
right.
the governor of Ohio running in a ticket. And then Trump showed up and messed up all the plans of the Republican Party, because they could have gotten Latino votes, but also Florida and also Ohio. That would have been a deadly, situation for the Democratic Party. But Trump basically ruined it. they're not going to get the Latino vote or African American votes maybe like in 10 in another generation because of this election.
You know, I think Trump has been the best political organizer for the Democrats among Latino voters. The big concern among African American voters is not who they're going to vote for, it's how many will vote. It's whether they will turn out to vote.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely right. Turn out, turn out, turn out.
Because there's no Obama in particular on the ballot.
Well, you see, I think a lot of people talk about there's no Obama. Absolutely. Obama phenomenon, first black president that many African Americans didn't even think they would see in their lifetime. But one of the biggest motivating factors in 2008 and 2012 was the assault on African Americans and minorities in this country to take away their vote. Mm-hmm. And so you had people showing up in lines because that was a motivating
for hours,
factor.
waiting in line for hours.
For hours. I'm going to vote, damn it, and nobody's going to take it away from me. That is missing to a certain extent right now because we've fought back and we've beat it back.
Well, not in a number of states in North Carolina. And,
right.
You know, you have a lot more. There are a lot of restrictions on voting that have been passed in recent years as well.
But I think that this is. But what we forget is we talk about the Latino vote, we talk about the African American vote, and people say, "Why is it close?" It is close because of the demographic shift and race in this country, and the election of Barack Obama just exacerbated the simmering racial divide that we have in this country. It is no accident when Donald Trump says, "Make America great again." That's not by accident. It's not just because
it's a dog whistle.
Because it says there was an America in which white people dominated, there was no demographic shift, and there's fear. And when we say make America great again, we are saying, look, folks, you slipped up and you elected that black guy, don't let it happen again.
But the same, I mean, I think that there's a little bit of that in there, though.
There's a lot of race in that.
But particularly in that, in the "Make America Great Again" phrase has actually been around for a while. In fact, Bill Clinton used it in '92 to be like an agent of change after 12 years of Republicans, and in fact Reagan also used it. In fact, in Trump swept. So that has been around there for a while, but. I think Politico just this week though had an article that showed that the Democrats are getting really nervous, particularly in Florida, because
over African American turnout.
Well, Florida has already begun early voting, and the numbers for African Americans are not where they want them, and so they're trying to get them organized. And I would not be surprised if we see President Obama probably flying into Florida once or twice over the next few weeks to try and energize that. The thing is, the Democrats, though, you know this. I mean, the interim chairman of the DNC now, though, is Donna Brazile, and she engineered a rather large black turnout in 2000, and I guess almost won Florida there. So you know we'll see.
Yeah, but one thing is just following that point and Bertha. After Obama got elected, we got 2 Supreme Court decisions that basically tried to prevent black and Latinos and people of color. You got Citizens United, and then you got the Shelby County versus Holder decision that basically limit the Voting Rights Act. This is going to be the first presidential election ever since that decision. So we don't know how these states are going to use the fact that the Voting Rights Act has been diminished in order to prevent people from voting. There have been some decisions in North Carolina that were very
Essentially,
favorable.
that decision said that that decisions that could be perceived as designed to limit minority participation or now no longer have to undergo review by the Justice Department.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, but you said that the North Carolina laws though were struck down because people pointed out that it was I mean I think voter
specifically
I think
designed.
I think basically in abstract I think voter ID is not a bad idea, particularly given identity theft in a number of other areas. Saying that this person is the person voting is not a bad idea.
But it doesn't happen in voting.
No, but in North Carolina, however in North Carolina, when it's very explicit when they were asking for the racial background of when blacks were voting versus when whites were voting, and then limiting the hours depending on the race and so forth. I mean, it was explicit.
And
they also did the same thing.
It was like surgical precision to target absolutely African American and minority voters.
But I think the fundamental core question is, why are they not energized to vote this year? And it's because, the vast majority of the country does believe that we're going on the wrong direction. They feel like 8 years under Obama's leadership, they have not seen their wages increase. They are still unemployed or underemployed. They're concerned about national security issues. So, I would really disagree with you. While, Trump certainly hasn't done anything to help himself on this, but to say that "Make America Great Again" is designed to be a racist slogan, I don't think that's true. I think people genuinely feel concerned, that we have $20 trillion in debt. They're worried about opportunities for their children, and it's not something that's isolated to any one race. And I think people, are really worried about what the next, 20 years of this country are going to look like. But, to me, one of the fascinating things has been, because I remember in 2008 feeling, as a Republican, I didn't vote for Obama, but I understood and I felt the excitement around his candidacy and what a powerful moment that it was for our country. And I noticed that, but in social circles and political circles, I think everyone really agreed with that. And Hillary has not been able to take that same energy in her. It is a historical candidacy, first woman major nominee. And so that to me has just been something that's really interesting, that the gender issue hasn't translated in the same way, because, I wanted to feel that too. And
well, I mean, Obama, it was obviously a charismatic African American, but he was quite literally a fresh face. Hillary Clinton is a woman, but I mean, she's been around for about 25 years. She's another Clinton, just in the same way that the Republican electorate was not enthused with the idea of another Bush. There is not as much enthusiasm in the country for another Clinton.
But it really astounds me when folks say, "Whoa, people want this is a change election." It's not a change election, because what we understand is we had the succession of Republican rule and Republican presidents, and that the effects of those policies from Ronald Reagan on is what this white America feeling so like it's going in the wrong direction, it's hit you. You voted against your own self-interest. And so, when jobs left and deals were made, the majority of folks in this country are white. And so it affected the white working class more. And then to say that last 8 years, somehow or another, didn't make it all rosy, when at every single turn, this president was fought by the Republican Party and the Republicans in Washington. And so I would say, middle America, white working class America, you need to look to the Republican Party.
Well, they're partly responsible. I would agree with that. They bear
but
responsibility.
To just have someone, this phenomenon of Trump, who's really not a phenomenon, he picked up on it immediately.
And
I'm not going to be competent. I'm not going to be prepared. From day one announcing his presidency, it was racist and we went after everyone and became a bully all through the primaries. And so to have someone be the head of the Republican Party who's totally unprepared, totally selfish, and is an embarrassment, and yet the Republicans couldn't deal with that. Now, you can say what you want to say about the Democrats and Hillary Clinton. Maybe it's a generational thing, but we are behind in the world. You want to talk about who's lagging? We've had one nation after another who actually has elected a woman leader.
Yeah.
And somehow in this country, we are so anti-woman and such a misogynist country.
We're not.
That is
We have
why
women
Donald
leading
Trump
companies
hits
all the
that
time.
nerve. That is
I
why
don't agree
a
with
sister
you.
can't get a break.
I don't
Well,
agree
but
with that.
the reason why I mean, part of it though is our political system. It's easier for a woman to be elected in a parliamentary system, such as the UK, such as India, such as Israel, because if you become the head of your party, and then the party wins a national election, the head of the party is the prime minister or the president or what have you. It's harder to get through our particular system than it is in other nations. But
Yeah,
that
but
doesn't
that
necessarily
would-
means we're not.
but-
We're more
Wait, wait.
misogynistic.
I agree with you in the parliamentary issue, but that's the argument, I think.
You think Indians aren't
The argument that you are
misogynist?
making, I think, applies more to third parties than to the issue of women. Because
that too.
the system that we have here, basically, you need 270, according to the Constitution,
That's
270 electoral colleges votes in order to be president. You have 3-4 parties, it's very difficult to reach 270. So you keep it in by 2 parties, and if you have a third party, it's going to be difficult. That has nothing to do with women.
Yeah. No, I'm not
Hillary's-
I'm not disagreeing with you, but I am saying that our system versus a parliamentary system has a great impact on how a woman can become head of state. That's
But and Hillary's problem right
so
now
we're just a-
isn't that she's
it's
a
a
woman.
sexist
That is
country and
not
we
her
love it.
fundamental
I
problem
didn't
of why
say
she's
that.
not doing better in the polls. It has nothing to do with that fact. It's because numbers in almost 90% view her as untrustworthy. So it has nothing to do.
Where does that come
If
from?
she
not
hadn't,
90, it's not-
if she
Well,
hadn't,
well,
done-
whether
yes,
it was
there's
60
many
or
polls
20
that,
or
that were
30.
up over 90.
No. I mean, I think it's like 70 or 80%.
I've been
Fine.
voting for lying, cheating, stealing white men all my voting life.
And it's time,
Okay.
it's
So
time to
it's
vote
time
for
for
a
a
lying,
lying
cheating,
cheating woman.
stealing
Give
woman.
us a break.
That's all right.
Let me
So don't
There
talk
you
to me
go.
about untrustworthiness.
You know, one of the issues that's being closely watched is.
Yes, Bob, please
Is
join the
the-
conversation.
No, that's okay.
Rein us in here.
I'm like
The Lester Holt.
I'm like Lester Holt. I have no more control over this conversation.
Bob is the minority on stage. There's a white guy on stage.
Right.
And you know, we haven't had a president in a long time.
I know.
So
It's okay.
there's the question of and I hope for another 8 years. There's the question of coattails, and you see it in the fight over the United States Senate. There are more Republican incumbents in states which are vulnerable for the Republicans. It's going to be the reverse, and it's going to be the reverse in 2 years. Democrats could take the Senate and lose it in 2 more years. But we also see it in New York State elections, where the Democrats, the one thing that they don't control, largely because of gerrymandered districts, is the state Senate. And even if they get a majority, they're probably not going to control the chamber. You play state politics an awful lot.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time up in Albany.
You have my sympathy.
Unfortunately.
Right.
Yeah, and I think the Trump phenomenon has been the biggest question, certainly as a strategist working on races. And initially, I'll be honest, I thought it was going to be catastrophic, but we're not actually seeing
Because people are separating them.
They are, and he's actually, take New York City out of the equation because you know, there's not many competitive Republican races in New York City. The Republican senators, Marty Golden and Andrew Lanza, don't even have opponents this year. But outside of New York City, a new poll just came out the other day saying Trump is dead even in the suburbs. And, you know, you presumably will do well in many pockets upstate outside of some of the upstate cities. So I don't think he's going to have the effect that people once thought, you know, right after the nomination. But, you know, it is something. I think that the House will be fine. The Senate is still an open question. And, you know, one of the things that has made this election cycle so interesting is that it has been totally unpredictable. So I think we still have another 6 weeks to go, and who knows
before
what will happen. Yeah.
Before our national nightmare is either over or just beginning.
Just beginning. Yeah. Either way.
But you know, we look at likely Senator to be Alcantara, who you know is going to be succeeding Adriano Espaillat, who's a kind of a hard-nosed lefty, community-oriented senator, and she's lining up with the Independent Democratic Caucus.
Well, I think that there is a reality in terms of the...
And there's a transactional quality to that I think defines a lot of Albany politics.
Oh, completely.
But in terms of the Democratic Party, not only national but also locally, there has been a turn to the left, which is something that people thought that was never going to happen. And that was basically the motor behind that was the Sanders campaign. There were all these jokes before he ran that he was never going to make it after Iowa, and look what happened. But those things had effects in the local campaigns. There was a candidate that almost won in Williamsburg that ran as a socialist, and she almost beat the incumbent senator, which I forgot his name now, and she almost beat him, and she ran as a socialist in the Democratic Party, because you have to run in the franchise, you see? You're a socialist, but there are two franchises. It's like McDonald's and Burger King, the Democratic Party and the
I am simply stunned and shocked that there is socialist sentiment in Williamsburg. Breaking news.
Well, the new Williamsburg. Let's put it like that.
The new Williamsburg.
The new
That's
Williamsburg.
We used to call Los Sures before.
That's right.
that is.
So anyway, that had an effect, but it also has an effect on the national level. There is a lot of Republicans at the local level that are trying to stay away from Trump because they want to preserve their Senate and the House of Representatives seats because they have elections this year too. Just a former senator from Virginia today, John Wagner, just gave the endorsement to Hillary. I mean, he has some local interests in Virginia that he wants to protect.
Well, there certainly are a lot of, but it's more than
former senator. Former senator.
Yeah, but it's also
senator,
more than
but he's
that.
still a big leader in Virginia.
Elizabeth Taylor's ex-husband.
But why do you?
Oh, that's what you.
But
One of
them.
9 or 10. Yes, I know.
Bob, I got to push back on you because I feel as though a little bit you're casting aspersions upon Marisol Alcantara.
No, I'm not casting aspersions on her.
When you say transactional. First of all,
I'm not sure transactional is a dirty word.
well, I'm here to say, as an organizer, transactional is not a dirty word, and joining the IDC is not necessarily a bad thing or something for people's raised eyebrows. I worked for 10 years straight to get the Democrats to take back the Senate in Albany. 10 years that I'll never get back again. And
they blew it
I
in
have
3
to
months.
tell you,
They blew it in 6 months.
I was stunned, outraged, angry that many of us had really worked to do that. And we could have had a really good functioning. And they blew it, and the Democrats who are whining now are at fault. So the IDC, I understand them, they're still Democrats, and I think that the thing for the Democratic caucus in Albany, they need to get with the IDC, and Marisol, none of the Democratic establishment reached out to her. And Diane Savino reached out to her, and now we have a Latina
The thing is, though,
in the Senate.
I do want to say this, though. The reason why transactional has become a dirty word in Albany is precisely because of what you said. Like the Democrats take over the Senate in 2008, 2010, I guess. And what happens? You have 4 people break away and then switch over to the Republicans. They cut various deals.
They caucus.
Three of those four all ended up going to jail. There has been this has been part of 10 years of waves of corruption. Many of transactional deals, people creating their own little non-profits to line their own pockets and the pockets of their family. That's why the word transactional has become a dirty
I agree
word
with you.
in Albany. And I'm not saying that Ms. Cantera is part of that, but people look at some members of the IDC. Jeff Klein, who's the chairman, in terms of some of the deals that he's cut, and they kind of roll their eyes and they wonder what is the new member getting herself into.
And does she even know? But I do agree with you.
Oh, I think she knows. She's a smart woman.
Just like the first potential woman president, has a lot of baggage thrust upon her. The word transactional has a lot of baggage thrust upon it. And so you got to wade through it to get, to the truth. But I do think that the IDC actually had a net positive effect on moving some things along.
Arguably, the IDC has pulled the Republican caucus to the left in order to keep them. It's very complicated.
It has, but
pushing south.
I would argue that the Senate has the governor has really dictated a lot of that because everyone has been so afraid of him, and he's governed in such a dictatorial way that that's really what's driving a lot of this.
You think he's happy with the status quo?
Oh, absolutely.
Of a legislature that
the last thing he wants is a Democratic Senate.
He's got three pockets of power that he can basically fend off one
divide and conquer.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think part of the problem in Albany has been this career. Political careerism where you have people that are up there for decades and decades and their whole focus ends up being centered on re-election, and so keeping power and staying in the majority is more important than policy. So that's where I think sometimes it can cause a problem. And not everyone that's been there a long time is bad or corrupt or anything, but it becomes you get very stuck in the mud and the status quo, and that it's just, and if you're a part of anything for 2 decades, that it's bound to happen.
Or more.
Or more, some of them.
Like Gottfried.
Well, yes. Is there a Trump effect in state elections, or is that too distant from, I arguably there is in some of the Senate elections, but is there, does the Trump weight, certainly in a Democratic state, Trump is an albatross around your neck. Does it impact state elections?
It's like she said at the beginning. Basically, it's going to have an effect on upstate, but I don't think it's going to have any effect. If anything, it's going to be a turnout operation that he's doing for Democrats to come out to vote in the city, but not upstate.
Part of the problem, because New York is such a blue state, Democrats are going to be, assume that Hillary is going to win in terms of New York. So there's not really an urgency for them to come out and vote unless they can somehow say, oh, we if we get this Senate seat over here, we might be able to flip. That's just.
Well, we have to protect Schumer against the strong challenge from Wendy Long.
That's the other.
That's a joke.
That's the little missing magic dust, because again, in 2008, people felt an excitement to come out because the first black president, we weren't sure, that we could win. Now we have 2 white people running again, and so you're right. Some folks don't have that same motivation.
Well, it is kind of a plug your nose election. I think on the presidential level, I think people feel like it's a binary choice. They have to go one direction or the other, but clearly, there's not a ton of enthusiasm for either candidate in terms of their favorability?
Well, there's some enthusiasm, I could tell you, in my community and other communities for Hillary Clinton. I think,
There is in my area
this
as well.
thing where this notion, if you keep repeating something over and over again after 30 years, that there's no enthusiasm for her, I just think is overplayed and just wrong. Like I designed a button for my friends that was red, black, and green. And if you're a hip hop fan, it says ride or die. And so
Hillary
we have some ride or die.
Hillary is a ride or die.
She's a ride or die chick.
person. You know where we're going.
I knew where you're going.
I'm going to take some questions. Tell us your name and your campus, please.
My name is Ricardo Garcia. My campus is John Jay College, and I have a two-part question. One is national and one is at the local level. The national level, I don't see any of the candidates discussing the economic crisis that's happening in Puerto Rico right now, and they're very reluctant to discuss it in a national forum. I wanted to know from the panel what your opinions are on what the candidates might discuss or how they might actually dive into this economical situation.
Collapse, yes.
Exactly.
Right.
And the second question is regarding Mr. Jeff Klein. What can mainline Democrats do to get Mr. Jeff Klein to win him over and to support the IDC? And if not, how do they marginalize?
Stay on his good side for one thing, but let's start with the question about Puerto Rico.
In terms of Puerto
and speak here.
Basically, what happened is that most of these two candidates, they don't know much about what is happening in Puerto Rico. It's a very complicated situation. So there is a fiscal committee there that basically is running Puerto Rico now. And it's extremely complicated. But it's basically a collection agency for the stockholders in Wall Street that they want their money back. It's nothing else but that. However, they are thinking about Florida because that's where the big concentration of Puerto Ricans are. Florida, like we said before, is a very important state in this election.
And Puerto Ricans fled to Florida because of the economic crisis.
And as soon as they land, because
like a million
because they are citizens, as soon as they land, they can register to vote.
They can register to vote, and they are registering to vote. So they are playing it safe because they don't know how they're going to go. But the history of Puerto Ricans in the United States, of all the Latino votes, and I say this with a lot of pride and I'm very respectful of others, of all the Latino groups, the more that leans to the left are Puerto Ricans in the United States. So the expectation is that most Puerto Ricans are going to be registering Democrats. Now, Trump doesn't want to touch that, and Hillary doesn't want to say the wrong thing that is going to upset that vote, because like we said before, the concentration is where there are 43% of registered voters in Florida, which is Orlando, Tampa, and that corridor. So they're playing it safe. She thinks that if she doesn't touch the issue, but start talking about issues of Puerto Ricans domestically in terms of Florida, but not in terms of Puerto Rico, she still can win it without creating too much commotion.
But I also think, with all due respect to our media brothers and sisters, if the question doesn't get asked...
With all due respect, there's always a bit of a
But if the question doesn't get asked, and we are distracted by the latest tweet, or, what is Ivanka doing, or, then I do think that we're doing ourselves a disservice. It had been brought up, it hasn't been brought up, and I agree. At the next debate, before the end, and even to the vice presidents, one of these moderators has got to put Puerto Rico.
Well, it's going to be interesting. I mean, the next debate is a town hall format, right. So you might get somebody in the audience who brings it up. It might be a little bit harder for the moderator to actually to bring it up, but we'll see. But you're right. Historically, the Latino main vote in Florida, obviously, has been Cuban. Now, with the influx of Puerto Ricans, it's a lot more balanced, and obviously with the opening to Cuba, you don't have that automatic bias.
I agree. In 2008, I went to work for the Obama campaign on election day to Florida. They sent 3,000 lawyers there just because what happened with Bush v. Gore before.
Of course.
And the second generation...
2,000 lawyers is a really scary prospect.
3,000. 3,000.
3,000.
That's how
that's even
scared they were.
scarier, right?
So this generation, the new generations of Cubans, they voted for Obama, and Obama in 2008 won Miami, and people couldn't believe it. But it was because the generation, the young Cubans, went against their parents' wishes, and now with the issue of the opening with Cuba, the relations, that is even better. So I don't think that the issue will be Florida in the South, Miami in the South, that's going to be Democrat. In the center is going to be the big fight, and I think it's going to be Democrat. And North Florida is going to be Republican.
Yeah. Well, it always is.
Because it's closer to basically South Carolina, etc.
They say Tallahassee is basically
and
Georgia.
Tallahassee.
I don't want to take...
But I do think, just like a really quick 30,000-foot view on the policy, I think this is, part of a larger issue is that if Trump were to win, I think this is where Paul Ryan will have a large effect and role in his presidency and the policy, because
he would have
he
to.
really is
reining him in.
Yeah, and just setting the tone, setting the agenda,
explaining things to him.
Running the country.
Paul Ryan
That's what Mike Pence
has been, working on this issue with the members in the House, and I think that this really whether it's Puerto Rico or another issue, that's where the House and Paul Ryan's agenda is really going to be driving, I think, a lot of the White
There is a
House
degree
policy
to
will be.
which the rise of Trump is at the same time the diminution of the hard right Tea Party influence, and that actually carries some possibility of a more rational interplay. You have somewhat less ideologically driven.
No, it's more
They
complicated.
had an autopsy, remember? They had an autopsy, and the autopsy of what we need to do.
Well, the autopsy was to reach out to people of color. Trump has blown that, but you do have but the Tea Party wave has certainly crested. I think.
Yeah, but I think the thing is though, people always got confused about the Tea Party. Part of it was was a real anti-government attitude, low taxes, and all this other kind of stuff. Trump really doesn't pay so much attention to those economic things, but the attitude of the Tea Party, particularly its hostility towards President Obama, is what Trump fed into and mined, and that's the birtherism and all that other kind of stuff.
50% of the vote. Let me try to get some more questions. Tell us your name and your campus, please.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Chesson. I'm from Queens College. Does the tone of this election contest reflect a diminishing public sphere in America? It seems like the candidates are talking in very general terms, while many are concerned that voter turnouts will be poor in November.
Well, I assume you're talking about the civil tone of the, we've had the center is being hollowed out to a degree, not only politically but economically, which I think is part of what drives, the Bernie Sanders voter and drives the Donald Trump voter to some. But is there any potential for a healing of the civic debate?
No. I
think part of the problem is the culture. This is going to create a whole can of worms to open it up. But we do have a reality TV star running for president, and if you go on Twitter, and it is so nasty. People jump all over you over everything you say, and it's kind of created this atmosphere for it.
But also, we're in the 21st century. You used to have to get your local newspaper, go to the 3 news stations. Now you have the world.
You have the echo
in your
chamber.
pocket.
Everybody lives in an echo chamber.
You can decide what you want, and you can get on, and you can communicate your own opinion. So we have not figured out how to deal with this, and that is what people are seeing and feeling. And it's not, as I say, I've been voting for a long time. It's always been generalities.
Oh yeah, of course. You have to, look. There's
Yeah, but I think it's unfair to say that it's when you
The tone has not been as
If
nasty.
you
Yeah.
watch the first debate, I mean, there's clearly one candidate that was quite specific on policy, and one candidate that was not at all. I mean,
Psychotic.
I don't think it's I don't think it's fair to kind of
Oh,
equate.
Hillary wasn't that bad.
I don't think it's fair to equate the kind of bloviating by Trump with the, Clinton always says, go to my website to see my 87-point
Yeah, I know,
plan.
which is ridiculous.
And it really is there. So I'm not sure that that kind of an equivalence
No.
is
The
really
thing is that you
fair.
had an opponent that it was completely undisciplined. We know who Trump is. I was baffled.
We in
when-
New York especially know who Trump is.
I was
right?
baffled when, at the beginning, he could have spoken about the fact that the issue of transparency, like in the Latino Leadership Institute, we teach people about debates, and we said, pick issues and then you break it down. So the issue of transparency is big with Hillary. It's a big weakness with her.
Yeah.
And then you break it down. One issue is the emails, 3,000 emails, not because she made a mistake. It's basically because she didn't say anything about it until the hearings. The second issue is the issue of the foundation, the Clinton Foundation. There is no transparency there. There is conflict of interest. So, someone who has been trained for the debate
Yeah.
would have had that immediately there in the debate. He mentioned the 3,000 emails in an issue that had nothing to do with the emails. And he didn't even mention the
Well, I thought
the
that was a
foundation
good
issue.
moment for him actually to pivot, but then he never followed through on
Well,
it.
he's like, oh, wait,
Yeah,
there's a butterfly.
yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Rita, and I'm from John Jay College for Criminal Justice. This question is directed mostly towards Bertha and Estades. There's a phrase
Estades.
amongst most of my peers. It goes something like "Bernie or bust," and especially of those of color, most of them. So how would you say that we would mobilize minority to be swayed towards Hillary, or do they need to be swayed at all, or is Bernie or bust legitimized?
Okay, can I start and you finish?
Yeah,
I'm
Look here.
always very upset when, not with the question, but a similar question. They said, why is it that minorities don't come out to vote? Why is it that Latinos don't come out to vote? And it upset me because usually what happens is that candidates assume that black and Latinos don't come out to vote in local elections and general elections. And I say, look, if you put the time that you put in the white communities and you put the resources that you put in the white communities, the black and Latino vote are going to come out to vote. It's not that we don't want to vote. It's just that you are not coming after our vote. Moynihan, one day, there is this famous anecdote of Moynihan that after an election,
Senator Moynihan.
Senator
Late
Moynihan
senator.
went back to his home after an election and he asked his neighbor, did you vote for me? And he said, no, I didn't vote. He said, why didn't you vote? Because you didn't ask me. So that's exactly what happened with the black and Latino communities. If you come after our vote, if you invest on our vote, we will come out to vote like anyone else. But you need to get rid of that stereotype that you have of us, that we're not coming out just because we're black and Latinos.
Well, when people say Bernie or bust, well, newsflash, the bust has come. So now you got to figure out what you're going to do. And it is a binary choice in which, you have Trump, you also have Hillary. Now, like it or not, this is your major choice. However, if you want to vote for third party, you can do that. And here's why. I voted, and I remember when Shirley Chisholm ran, and people said, you're crazy, you're a young person. When Jesse Jackson, I got energized. It is fine. It is good. And in a way, I'm not a Bernie person because for various and sundry reasons. But this is, he had to come along in this generation. And it was fine to be Bernie or bust. But now that the bust has come,
It's time to grow up.
it's time to go to the booth and vote for the issue that brings you out. It's not a question of voting. You must vote, but go and vote for your issue, whether it's economics, whether it's race, whether it's whatever.
We have less than 8 minutes, so let me try to get some more questions.
Good evening, Sam Pinto, Queens College. In regards to last night's presidential debate, which candidate do you think did a better job swaying an undecided voter to support them? And
I'm going to
also,
let you
do you
take
think
that.
that there was maybe a critical moment where one of the candidates did something that would convince a person away from them and
Okay.
start supporting their competition?
Yeah, I don't know that it's going to have all that much impact. You know, we'll see the polls in a couple days. She might get a few point bounce out of it. But I think that for the most part, if you were in Trump's camp, he didn't really lose that many votes. And if you were for Hillary, she definitely did one of the biggest benefits, I think, for her that night was that, you know, her campaign had been, you know, bleeding significantly for the past few weeks, and she stopped it and re-energized her base and showed them that she was in it to win it. And I think
Of course,
from that
of course,
standpoint,
she did something
energized.
remarkable. She actually
So-
prepared for the debate.
Right, but yeah, so I think I don't know that any of the debates, barring some, you know, huge moment, really is convincing
Yeah.
voters.
I think that there have been some reports here and there that Trump may have convinced some folks in some Democratic areas in like Pennsylvania and Ohio and something like that. I would say that Mrs. Clinton was very, very well prepared, and I think if there is a moment that may end up having a ripple effect out is when she got Donald Trump to basically admit that, you know, it's smart not to be paying any taxes. That's one of those kind of things where if you're, even if
It's
you're...
a Romney 47%
Yeah,
moment.
but it's a Romney 40, and particularly his base being
worse.
working class men, particularly white working class men, when he admits that he isn't paying anything in taxes. And another smart thing I think that Mrs. Clinton did is when she tied in her father's small business to the amount of people that Trump had basically stiffed. Those were kind of targeted messages to his base, to his solid working class base. And that may not have an effect right there, but it may have a ripple effect down the road.
Yes, sir.
My name is Saul from John Jay. My question is, what do you think the long-term effect will be from the Bernie Sanders movement and the Trump movement on their political parties? Will they shift or will they stay the same?
It's a very interesting question. I think the effects are very different in the different parties. My sense is, assuming that Hillary beats Trump, is that there's going to be a very conscious effort on the part of the Republican establishment to kind of pretend this never happened.
Well, not
No, actually,
no, they're gonna wake up and say, okay.
They're going
Enough
to go
of the
back to the
fever
same
dream.
autopsy.
Well,
No,
but
no.
actually maybe, and I look forward to it, maybe this time actually implement it and really sit down and talk about it. Because one thing about the Republicans is right. There was a moment in history when most black folks were Republicans. There was
Yes.
that time.
Nixon in 1960.
And so I hope that Hillary beats Trump so that the Republicans can take their party back and make it great again. However,
make the Republican Party
make
great
the
again.
Republican Party
That was
great
kind
again.
of racist, wasn't it?
However, I know. However, I do think Bernie Sanders has had an absolute, indelible, profound effect on the Democratic Party. That genie is out of the bottle. It will never go back in again. Progressive, real progressive, not just lip service. Young people are not going to stand for, even if they vote for Hillary and she wins, young people under the influence of the Bernie Sanders movement are not going to stand to be shortchanged. And so Bernie Sanders will have more of an effect than Trump in the long run.
What's
Well,
the
it started-
pre-post-mortem? The pre-post-mortem.
Well, it was kind of what I started out by saying, is that I think on both sides you are seeing this populist surge, and I don't know. I think a lot depends on whether or not you win or lose, but I think in both sides, no one's going away right away anyway. You know, will people become disaffected again if they don't have candidates that, you know, on the Trump side, he woke up a lot of people that weren't voting before. So if they don't have a Trump-like candidate, are they going to be as energized? That that remains to be seen.
But there
Yeah,
has
just
been
very quickly on the Republican side, I think Trump is basically shattered any kind of free trade consensus that was in the Republican Party, and I think that's going to outlast him. And I think it's also winner. I mean, if he loses, I think the Republicans are going to be revising the way they look at taxes and try and make them more working class.
Two things. Trump basically almost destroyed the Republican Party this year. Bernie Sanders, that comes from the left, basically transformed positively the Democratic Party. The platforms that the Democratic Party is going to be legislating in the next 4 years after Hillary wins, which I think is going to win, are going to be more to the left than ever before, not because of Hillary, but because Sanders and Senator Warren.
Which won't get through a Republican House, though.
Yeah, and what evidence do you have that the party was almost destroyed?
In this election because of Trump.
We haven't lost one seat.
But you may lose the House of Representatives because
we're not going to lose the House of Representatives.
Representatives.
I will make you a bet right here now that won't happen.
I want to try to get another question in. Yes.
Hi, my name is Abdurrahman Saf from John Jay College, and my question is, what would appointment to the U.S. Supreme Court look like under Donald Trump? How about Hillary Clinton?
I think that Judge Judy is still in the bar.
I know we're almost out of time.
Yes.
Very quickly. If on the Donald Trump, that's actually one of the big fears. Nobody really knows. Obviously, it'll be the next president will get at least 2, maybe 3 appointments. If Hillary Clinton wins, there's a possibility the Republicans may decide to vote on Merrill Garland, President Obama's last appointment. Otherwise, it'll be very left.
They may find something.
Yeah, and Trump did put out a list of prospective candidaents that
he had never heard of until he wrote the list. Until they gave him the list.
Yeah, but the party,
until the Heritage
Foundation gave him the list.
Exactly,
And that list is frightening.
They're strict constitutionalists, and the party is supportive of those names.
Yeah. Okay, I got the goodbye sign. I always make deadline. I want to thank you. This is very spirited. Make sure you get out and vote. As somebody who was raised in Brooklyn, you can vote early and often. And thank you all. And we'll see you next time on CUNY Forum.